In 1977, in an interview with David Frost, Nixon states,
Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal.
By definition.
Exactly.
the Watergate scandal was the first presidency scandal known about where the president could have faced impeachment. The Watergate scandal is important to American history because it reformed presidential laws, it influenced our United States law program, and it set a legacy for future presidential scandals. Richard Nixon is the mastermind behind the Watergate scandal, although he wasn't directly involved. The Watergate scandal started on May 28, 1972, as electronic surveillance equipment was placed at the Democratic headquarters in the Watergate building. Nixon instructed this to happen so he would be able to leak secrets about his opponent, McGovern, before the presidential election in November. Shortly later, on June 17th, 5 men were arrested while they were attempting to fix the security footage, but it was stated that no one in the White House was directly involved. The Senate had suspicions about Nixon at the time and they wanted to bring him into court to testify, so they subpoenaed his presidential files and called him in to testify. Later, Nixon informs the Senate committee that he will not testify nor grant access to presidential files, which created more suspicion about Nixon. Attorney Archibald Cox was sworn in as special prosecutor on May 25th, which meant that he was in charge of the Watergate case. On July 16th, Cox receives news that there is a White House taping system, which leads Cox to subpoena White House tapes and documents to investigate cover-up. Nixon refuses to comply with the Cox subpoena, but eventually made a compromise to let Senator Stennis, who had trouble hearing, listen and interpret the tapes for everyone. On October 20th, 1973, Cox refused Nixon's compromise, which led him to get fired, and the Attorney General Elliot Richardson and Deputy Attorney General William Ruckelshaw resigned. Nixon also abolished the Watergate Task Force, and this led to many suspicions about Nixon. This came to be known as the Saturday Night Massacre. Knowingly, Nixon attacking his own Justice Department came with consequences. Around 50,000 citizens sent telegrams to the White House, and 21 Congress members made resolutions calling for Nixon to be impeached. There was lots of pressure going on from the public, which put pressure on Nixon personally. Nixon finally gave in and appointed Leon Jaworski as the new prosecutor of the Watergate scandal, and he released the Oval Office tapes in July 1974. Within the tapes, Nixon states,
Now, on the investigation, the Democratic break-in thing, we're back in the problem area because the FBI is not under control because Ray doesn't exactly know how to control it. And their investigation is now leading in some productive areas because they've been able to trace the money, not through the money itself, but through the bank, sources, the banker. So, and it goes some directions we don't want it to go. Also, there have been some things like an informant came in off the street to the FBI in Miami where the photographer, as a friend who's a photographer, we developed some films for this guy, Parker.
Also, as they obtained records from the phoning system at the White House, they realized that in some of the conversations, they just cut off and a white noise is present. Here's an example of one of the phone calls.
Hello, Mr. President.
Yeah.
I have Edward Cox looking for Patricia. Is she there with you?
Yeah, here she is.
All right.
Eddie.
Hello? Just a minute. On the line.
Thank you.
Yeah, hello?
Hi.
Hi.
What's that?
That's Daddy.
Oh.
We're down here in the Lincoln Room. He's been hearing from everybody.
Oh, really?
The cabinet and Billy Graham and Governor Reagan.
This showed that someone obstructed the evidence of the phone calls that were in the White House. Both of these tapes of Nixon prove that he had involvement within the Watergate scandal because he was speaking about the FBI on the case and the conversation about it was blurred out. After this, there was a phase of shock that swept through the White House, and it was inevitable that Congress would make the move to impeach Nixon because of the pressure they were facing. In both the Republican and Democratic parties, there was ideas to move towards impeachment. On the Republican side, Representative Jerome R. Waldy introduced an impeachment resolution from the Democratic Party. 3 Democrats in the Senate, Stuart Symington of Missouri, Edmund S. Muskie of Maine, and Edward M. Kennedy of Massachusetts, all believed that Mr. Nixon's actions made impeachment proceedings more likely. Cox even stated that the next proper step was impeachment. He says, "Whether ours shall continue to be a government of law and not of men is now for Congress and ultimately the American people." On July 27, 1973, the Judiciary Committee changes Articles 1, 2, and 3 of the impeachment resolution, so they were able to fully charge Nixon and impeach him if needed. Nixon is then charged with obstruction of investigation, Watergate break-in, misuse of powers, and violation of his oath of office, and failure to comply with House subpoenas. Instead of waiting to go through all these courts, Nixon just decides to resign and give his position to Ford. On August 9th, President Nixon resigns, and on September 8th, President Ford pardons Nixon.
Finally, I feel that Richard Nixon and his loved ones have suffered enough and will continue to suffer no matter what I do, no matter what we as a great and good nation can do together to make his goal of peace come true. Now, therefore, I, Gerald R. Ford, President of the United States, pursuant to the pardon power conferred upon me by Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, have granted, and by these presents do grant, a full, free, and absolute pardon unto Richard Nixon for all offenses against the United States which he, Richard Nixon, has committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period from July 20, 1969 through August 9, 1974.
Two writers were also very important to this case. In June of 1972, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein got assigned to cover the break-in at the Watergate. These two men were responsible for reporting on the Watergate scandal, and they did most of the original news reporting for it. Bernstein was the first man that suspected that Nixon was involved because he had found a checkbook that proved it. These two men's discoveries led to further investigations of Nixon. Carl Bernstein went on to write the book, Alderman's President, and within it says, "It was 9:30, just an hour from deadline for the second edition. Woodward began typing. A $25,000 cashier check, apparently earmarked for the campaign chest of President Nixon, was deposited in April in the bank account of Bernard L. Baker, one of the 5 men that were arrested at the break-in and alleged bugging attempt at the National Democratic Committee headquarters here, June 17, also known as Watergate." The Watergate scandal was very important because Richard Nixon was one of the first presidents to leave office before his term was over. And this was big news at the time. Also, this event influenced the law program because people who wish to become attorneys now have to take a course on professional responsibility, and the American Bar Code rewrote its responsibility code. This is because of Nixon's lying during his term of presidency. After the scandal, any scandal within presidency includes the name blank skate scandal. Also, it showed the majority of the power of the Supreme Court because they unanimously voted to impeach Nixon. General Elliot Richardson says, Watergate has made one significant contribution, at least to the extent that there are many office holders who we are becoming convinced that honest politics, open, candid politics, is the best politics. Although we did not have another resignation, Congress did impeach President Clinton for lying to Congress about his affair with Monica. Overall, Watergate has changed the way that America views presidents and the scandals around them.